She assaulted me first. She grabbed my arm. Claudine Rowe's voice sliced through the air as I ran across the yard. She was standing on my porch, clipboard in hand, her HOA badge swinging from her neck like it made her God. You people never learn the rules of Briarwood Lake Estates, do you? Beside her, my pregnant sister Marla was on the ground, one hand clutching her stomach, the other pressed to the burn mark just below her collarbone, fresh from the security guard's taser. Gavin Brooks, the guard himself, stood frozen, weapon still half raised. I didn't need to ask what happened. The sound of Marla's scream was still echoing down the street. The neighbors were peeking from behind their blinds, pretending they hadn't seen Claudine order her officer to shock a pregnant woman for refusing to take down a wooden birdhouse. You called this an unauthorized fixture? I said, stepping between them. That's what justified assault? My voice came out steady, but my hands were shaking. Claudine only smirked. Mr. Mallory, your sister obstructed enforcement. You'll be hearing from our board attorney. You mean your brother, I shot back. The one who owns Rowe Security, the one you hired without disclosure. For a split second, her jaw tensed. I knew she didn't expect me to know that. If you're watching this right now, listen. HOAs like this get away with things because people stay quiet. Don't. Hit subscribe now, because what happened next tore this neighborhood open, and you'll want to know how it ends. I know the statute, Claudine, I said, lowering my voice. HOA boards can't delegate enforcement to private armed contractors. Not in Virginia. Section 9.1138. You violated state code the moment you told him to touch that taser. Her smirk faltered. I think we're done here, she snapped, but her voice wavered. She turned on her heel and marched toward her SUV. Gavin followed, pale and silent, leaving my sister shaking on the porch steps. My name's Ethan Mallory. I'm a civil rights paralegal, and I've spent years cleaning up the kind of messes bureaucrats like Claudine make for a living. But this wasn't a case file. It was my sister, 7 months pregnant, lying on the concrete where our father's birdhouse used to hang. That birdhouse, painted the color of our childhood fence, wasn't just decoration. It was the last thing our dad built before his stroke. Marla had hung it again last week as a way to calm herself. It's just a small thing, she'd said, smiling through the morning light. Something alive to remind me he's still here. Claudine called it non-compliant architecture and issued a 1 in 200 violation. Now the birdhouse was gone, confiscated by the same guard who just tased her. My sister's breath came in short, ragged gasps. Ethan, she whispered, it wasn't supposed to go this far. No, I said, crouching beside her, but now it has. The blue lights hit the street seconds later. Real police this time, not Claudine's hired enforcers. Neighbors began to step out of their doorways, murmuring, recording, realizing maybe they weren't as safe as they thought. I could see the questions forming in their eyes. Can she really do that? Do we have to listen to her? I stood up as the officers approached. Officer, I said calmly, this woman was assaulted on private property by a contractor acting under false legal authority. You'll find Rowe Security doesn't have state authorization for enforcement. I'll provide the documentation. My tone stayed flat, but my pulse was a hammer in my ears. Marla was helped to the ambulance, pale but breathing steadily. The paramedic told me her vitals were stable, but she'd need monitoring. Watching them close the doors, I felt something break clean in me. This wasn't about one incident. It was about years of silence dressed as civility, about a community that mistook intimidation for order. Claudine's SUV idled at the corner, waiting for the officers to clear. Through the windshield, she met my eyes. I could almost hear her thinking, "You'll regret challenging me." But she didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that every violation notice she'd ever issued, every fine, every recorded meeting was archived under state open record law. She didn't know that I'd once helped draft the very complaint format that could dissolve her board for misuse of authority. When the ambulance pulled away, I looked back at the empty spot on the porch where the birdhouse had hung. The nail was still there, swinging slightly in the wind. My father used to say, "You measure power by how it behaves when no one can fight back." That's when I decided I wouldn't just fight back, I'd end this, permanently. Because in Briarwood Lake Estates, they thought they were above the law. They were about to find out they weren't. By the next morning, the HOA notice board was already cleaned. No trace of last night's chaos. Claudine's team worked fast, replacing fear with silence. but the scorch mark on my porch where Marla collapsed was still there, a black memory against white paint. I took a photo. That was evidence now. Down the street, the lake shimmered like nothing had happened. Children rode bikes, sprinklers hissed, and neighbors pretended they hadn't watched a pregnant woman get tased over a birdhouse. In Briarwood Lake Estates, pretending was survival. I drove past the clubhouse where they had hung a fresh banner, Community Harmony Through Compliance. The hypocrisy almost made me laugh. Claudine Rowe's name was at the bottom, signed in perfect cursive beneath the HOA seal. The HOA was already trying to rewrite the story. A disturbance, they called it. No mention of a taser. No mention of Gavin Brooks or Marla's ambulance ride. Just an implication that my family had escalated a routine enforcement interaction. I stopped at the mailbox cluster, flipping through letters until I saw it, an official-looking envelope stamped with the HOA logo. A fine. Violation of conduct, it read. $1,000 for verbal hostility toward board representatives. I could almost hear Claudine's smug tone in every word. When I turned, two of my neighbors were whispering near the flower bed. Mrs. Tran, who'd lived here 15 years, looked away the moment I caught her eye, but the man next to her, Mark Dalton, didn't. He'd been fined 3 times last year for parking his truck 2 inches off the pavement. "She's saying your sister attacked the guard," Mark muttered quietly. "That he used the taser in self-defense." His jaw tightened. "We all know that's a lie." "Then say something," I said. He gave a bitter laugh. "And get hit with another violation? Ethan, you're new to fighting her. We're all tired, man. We've tried petitions, meetings, nothing sticks. She's got the board in her pocket." I leaned against the post, studying the lake houses. "Not for long." Mark looked at me like he wanted to believe it, but didn't dare. "You've got a plan?" "Working on it," I said. "But I'll need people willing to talk when the time comes." He hesitated, then nodded. "When it's safe." That was the culture here. Fear disguised as order. Claudine had turned compliance into a currency. You paid with silence or you paid in fines. That afternoon, I drove to the community patrol meeting, mandatory for anyone disputing a fine. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside the clubhouse, rows of folding chairs faced a projector screen showing HOA incident slides. Claudine wasn't there, but her presence filled the room. Her voice came through the speakers, pre-recorded for authority. "As your HOA president, I remind you, harmony depends on obedience. If we don't enforce standards, property values will collapse." Behind me, a woman muttered, "She says that every time." I recognized her, Lydia Marsh, owner of Lot 42. Last spring, Claudine forced her to remove her daughter's wheelchair ramp because it wasn't architecturally consistent. I turned slightly. "You kept the ramp?" She shook her head. "Couldn't afford the daily fine. My husband built a temporary one in the garage." Something twisted in my chest. If she's enforcing rules outside her legal scope, the state can intervene. Lydia frowned. "You think the state cares about HOA nonsense?" "Not usually," I said, "unless someone proves it's more than nonsense. If she's running an unlicensed enforcement operation, that's a criminal liability issue." Her eyebrows lifted. "You sound like you know this stuff." "I do," I said quietly. Civil rights paralegal. The room grew quiet as the next slide showed incident violation, obstruction of enforcement, Mallory property. They'd turned my sister's trauma into a case study. The photo was cropped so you couldn't see the taser, just Marla sitting on the ground, crying. Claudine's recorded voice said, "Note how escalation occurs when residents defy simple requests." My hands clenched on my knees. No one said a word. They just stared at the screen, terrified to move. When the meeting ended, I stood outside the clubhouse, breathing hard. Across the lot, Gavin Brooks was standing near the patrol truck, smoking nervously. Our eyes met for a second before he looked away. There it was again. The guilt, the hesitation. He wasn't a villain. He was someone under pressure. And he was the first crack in Claudine's wall. If Claudine's empire ran on fear, Gavin was the proof it could falter. I took another photo, his security badge, the truck number, the HOA logo stenciled over the row's security name. That was evidence of misrepresentation, a private company branding itself as official enforcement. The law was clear. No private entity can present itself as law enforcement within a homeowners association. It was time to start collecting every piece of proof she'd left in plain sight. Because this wasn't just my fight anymore. Every neighbor too scared to speak was part of it now. And fear, no matter how polished it looks, leaves fingerprints. I found Gavin that evening down by the lakeside dock, sitting on the railing with his uniform shirt unbuttoned and his security badge hanging from one corner of his pocket. The last orange light of sunset shimmered over the water, painting everything too calm for what had happened. He looked like a man trying to make peace with something unforgivable. He didn't see me at first. He was staring at his reflection, shoulders hunched forward, thumb flicking nervously against the metal clasp of his taser holster. Every few seconds he'd let go, then grab it again, like muscle memory couldn't decide if it was ready to stop being a weapon. "Gavin," I said quietly. He flinched so hard the dock creaked. "Relax, I'm not here to make trouble." He swallowed, glanced around to make sure no one else was watching. "You shouldn't be down here," he muttered. His voice was low, shaky. "She's already saying you're recording people without permission. That's another violation." "She's reaching," I said. "I don't need recordings. I need the truth." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it. The guilt. The thing eating him alive. His jaw trembled. His eyes darted between me and the water, like he was deciding whether to talk or jump in and vanish. "You know what you did was illegal," I continued softly. "Not just morally wrong, legally. She told you to tase a pregnant woman. That's excessive force under Virginia statute. You were following orders, I get it, but she doesn't have the authority to give them." He rubbed the back of his neck, fingers twitching. "You think I don't know that? I signed up for private security, not to play cop. But when Claudine says something, you follow. That's how you keep your job. That's how you keep your rent paid." There it was, the first crack widening. He wasn't defending her. He was defending the fear she'd built into everyone around her. "She's got you all convinced she runs the law," I said. "But you and I both know this isn't enforcement. It's intimidation." He exhaled slowly. "You don't understand what she's capable of." His fingers dug into the railing. "She tracks everything, our hours, our vehicles, even our phone calls. Her brother writes the contracts, but she rewrites the rules. You speak up, you're out. I've seen guys lose everything for less. Then help me make sure no one else does." He looked away again, the muscles in his jaw working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. The surface of the lake rippled, catching fragments of fading light. His reflection wavered, half there, half gone. "Gavin," I said quietly, "I can protect you. Not physically, maybe not yet, but legally. The moment you share what she's ordered you to do, the liability shifts. It's not you anymore, it's her. The Department of Professional Regulation can take her entire operation down." He let out a dry laugh. "You really think the state cares about some HOA president abusing her power?" "I don't think," I said. "I know, because that's my job. Civil rights law doesn't stop at property lines. What happened to my sister isn't a community dispute. It's unlawful enforcement under a fraudulent contract." He didn't answer. His breathing was shallow, and I could see his hands tremble against the wood rail. A gust of wind came off the lake, pushing a few leaves across the surface. He watched them drift, like maybe if he stared long enough, they'd sink and take his guilt with them. "You ever think about what it felt like for her?" I asked quietly. "For Marla? She's 7 months pregnant, Gavin. She hit the ground screaming your name, not hers, yours." That hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders hunched deeper, and for a long time he didn't speak. Then, barely audible, "I didn't mean to pull the trigger. She said to get control of the situation. I thought she was reaching for something. I just reacted." I nodded once. "Then let's fix it. You don't have to testify now, but you can help me verify the contracts, the ones that tie Rose security to the HOA. You've seen them, haven't you?" He hesitated, a long pause, then the smallest nod. "Yeah. Claudine signs them herself, uses the HOA letterhead, but her brother invoices it privately. It's all mixed up. Looks official, but it's not." That was it. The confirmation I needed. Proof of false representation, proof of jurisdiction fraud, the kind of evidence that brings outside regulators straight through the front door. When I stepped back toward my car, I turned once more. Gavin was still sitting there, fingers pressed to his badge, eyes glassy. The wind moved across the lake again, scattering light like broken glass. He looked trapped between confession and survival, a man realizing he'd been part of something rotten, and maybe for the first time, wanting to set it right. The next morning, Claudine struck back. I woke to find a bright red envelope taped to my door, bold black letters screaming, "Final warning." The HOA crest gleamed at the top like a threat dressed as formality. Inside, she'd cited me for harassment of authorized personnel and disruption of community peace, a $1,000 fine, plus a threat to suspend my community privileges. Translation: no clubhouse, no lake access, no mailroom key. They were cutting me out. I didn't tear it up. I pinned it to my corkboard beside the others. Every notice was a breadcrumb leading straight to her. Marla called from the hospital just after sunrise. Her voice was steadier now, though she sounded small, tired. "The doctor says the baby's fine," she whispered, "but they want me resting. Don't do anything reckless." "Reckless?" I said, forcing a calm tone. "I'm past that. I'm just being precise." The truth was, I'd barely slept. I'd stayed up going through state codes and licensing requirements until the numbers blurred together. Clause after clause confirmed what I already knew. HOA security isn't enforcement. They can observe, report, not touch, not threaten. And if Claudine had signed those contracts herself, she'd crossed a legal line wide enough to drive a patrol truck through. By mid-morning, I was standing in the HOA office. The lobby smelled like disinfectant and intimidation, perfectly polished floors, walls lined with framed compliance awards. Behind the reception desk sat a woman who refused to look me in the eye. "I'm here for the board meeting minutes," I said. "Last quarter and current." "They're restricted to residents in good standing," she replied mechanically. I held up the notice from my door. "I'm disputing a violation. Under state open governance statute, I have the right to access all financial and meeting records." Her smile faltered. "You'll need to file a written request." "I already did," I said, sliding a printed email across the counter. "Twice." She stared at the paper, then at me. The silence stretched. Finally, she stood, disappeared into a back hallway, and returned 5 minutes later with a thin binder. "You can review it here," she said flatly. I took it to the corner table and began flipping pages. The meeting minutes were as clean as she probably expected, carefully edited summaries, missing half the real conversations. But then I noticed something, an agenda note labeled Security Compliance. Expansion, approved motion by President Rowe. There was no vote record, no second signature, just her name. That single line could unravel her entire operation. It proved she was acting unilaterally, using HOA authority to validate her own private contracts. A textbook overreach. I pulled out my phone, taking slow, deliberate photos of each page. The receptionist's eyes flicked up, but she didn't stop me. Maybe she'd seen enough of Claudine's empire to want it to crumble. As I left, the sound of heels echoed behind me. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" Claudine's voice carried down the hallway like ice cracking. She appeared in the doorway, crisp blazer, perfect hair, a predator in daylight. "Good morning, President Rowe," I said evenly. "I was just reviewing your records." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're on thin ice, Mr. Mallory. Filing false accusations against this board could cost you your property rights. Then I'll be careful to only file the true ones." Her expression twitched just slightly, then she leaned closer. "You think the state cares about your little crusade? We're self-governed, always have been. People here don't want chaos, they want control." "That's the problem," I said. "You confuse control with safety. They're not the same thing." She stepped back, arms folded. "Enjoy your visit. You'll be hearing from our counsel." Outside, I stood in the parking lot, letting the morning air cut through the static in my head. Across the lot, the HOA patrol truck was parked crooked, the Rose Security logo half scraped from the side where someone had tried to remove it. It wasn't just me anymore. Cracks were forming everywhere. I opened my notes and began typing a timeline, dates of violations, fines, incidents, and contracts. Each entry linked back to Claudine's unauthorized expansion motion. Each piece would form the skeleton of a formal complaint to the state's Department of Professional Regulation. Victory wouldn't come from shouting or fighting. It would come from precision, from turning her own paperwork into the rope she'd hang herself with. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the mirror, eyes ringed from exhaustion but steady. She thought I was just another resident losing his temper. She hadn't realized yet that every word she'd signed was now evidence. And soon, the state would read it, line by line. I drove straight from the HOA office to my firm's legal archive room, a cold basement lined with metal shelves and humming fluorescent lights. I'd spent years helping attorneys gather evidence for civil rights cases, tenant discrimination, wrongful eviction, housing fraud. But this time, the paperwork on the table wasn't someone else's nightmare. It was mine. I spread Claudine's meeting minutes beside a stack of state statutes, my laptop open to the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulations Enforcement page. The pattern was clear now. Her security compliance expansion wasn't just an overreach, it was a direct violation of state licensing law. Rose Security wasn't authorized to enforce anything beyond private patrol observation, and Claudine had turned them into an armed HOA police force. On one side of the desk, I had copies of her HOA memos stamped with the association's seal. On the other, Rose Security invoices written on the same letterhead. She'd merged a private business with a non-profit governing body and disguised it as community enforcement. That wasn't just unethical. It was fraud under Code Paragraph 18.2, 172. The deeper I read, the more her empire unraveled. Every enforcement notice bore her electronic signature. Every violation fine referenced executive directive orders, a phrase that doesn't exist in HOA law. She'd been creating her own shadow government. I rubbed my eyes, then called an old colleague, Carla Nguyen, a compliance attorney who'd handled DPOR cases before. Hypothetical question, I said. What happens when a homeowners association contracts unlicensed armed security to enforce bylaws? She didn't even hesitate. If you can prove direct authorization by the HOA president, that's an automatic state investigation. And if there's a documented injury involved, there is, I interrupted quietly. A pregnant woman was tased. Silence, then a slow exhale on the other end. File the complaint today, Ethan. Don't wait. Include every exhibit you can. DPOR takes months, but when they move hard. Understood. When the call ended, I leaned back, staring at the ceiling tiles. It hit me how calculated Claudine's power really was. She didn't just bully people. She engineered compliance by writing the rules herself. But that arrogance was exactly what made her vulnerable. She'd left her fingerprints on every illegal contract. I began building the dossier, exhibit labels, page numbers, photo attachments. I documented the incident chronology, taser use, false violation, intimidation tactics, and the unilateral security expansion vote. I referenced each one under corresponding state statutes. Every file I created felt like a nail in her coffin. Around noon, a shadow crossed the glass door. Mark Dalton stepped in, hat in hand. "Heard you were down here," he said. "Saw Claudine tailing you earlier. Figured I'd check if you were still breathing." "I'm fine," I said, half smiling. "Just putting a few things together." He looked at the papers spread out across the desk. "You're really doing it, huh? Going after her?" "She went after my family," I said. "I'm just returning the paperwork." Mark walked closer, scanning the evidence. "You know, half this neighborhood's waiting for someone to take her down. The rest are too scared to admit it." "They won't have to fight," I said. "Just tell the truth when the state asks." He nodded slowly, eyes flicking toward a file marked Rose Security Contract Renewal, HOA Board Approval Pending. "That's the one she bragged about at the last barbecue," he muttered. "Said it made her untouchable." "Good," I said. "That means she signed it herself." He gave a low whistle. "You're serious about this?" "Dead serious." When he left, I scanned the final page into a single digital packet. As the progress bar crawled across the screen, I imagined Claudine's face when she realized her arrogance had written her downfall. For weeks she'd hidden behind authority. Now the state would see exactly how hollow her power was. I finished the upload, then composed the formal complaint. Subject: Unauthorized enforcement activity by Briarwood Lake. Estates HOA and affiliated contractor. Attached, 17 exhibits, time-stamped and verified. The last line read, "Incident resulted in physical harm to pregnant resident. Immediate investigation requested. My finger hovered for a second over the submit button. Once I clicked it, there was no turning back. Claudine would retaliate, maybe even try to frame me. But this was bigger than fines or meetings now. It was about drawing a line between law and intimidation. I clicked send. The confirmation email hit my inbox 5 seconds later. Your complaint has been received by the Virginia Department of Professional and Occupational Regulation. Case number 251173. I leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. For the first time, Claudine Rowe wasn't untouchable. She was on record. The fluorescent lights flickered above me, their hum steady and low. Somewhere outside, I imagined the sound of a hammer, one that had just started swinging back. That night, I drove to the hospital again. Marla's room was dim, except for the steady green line on the monitor beside her bed. She looked better, color in her cheeks again, but her hands still trembled when she reached for mine. "You filed it, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded. "It's official. The Department of Professional Regulation has the complaint. They'll investigate the HOA and Rowe's security." Her eyes filled, part relief, part fear. "She'll come after you, Ethan. You know that." "She already has," I said. "But now she's under someone else's microscope." Marla looked out the window toward the city lights. "I just want to go home." "You will," I said. "When it's safe." She smiled faintly. "You sound like Dad when he used to say that before storms." That hit deeper than I expected. Dad had believed in order, not fear. Rules that protected, not punished. Claudine had twisted that same idea into control, and I wasn't leaving Briarwood until I untied the knot she'd made of this place. By the next morning, my phone buzzed with the first confirmation. A DPOR investigator named Ruth Danner had been assigned to review the complaint. I could almost feel the gears start turning, slow, bureaucratic, but unstoppable. Still, I knew Claudine wouldn't wait quietly. I had to prepare before she spun the narrative. That afternoon, I headed to a new location, the local sheriff's substation. The same officers who'd responded to the taser call recognized me instantly. The older one, Deputy Alvarez, looked uncomfortable. "Heard your HOAs in the news again," he said. "Word is, their security folks have been crossing lines." "That's one way to put it," I said. "I'm filing an incident supplement for my sister's assault. The state's investigating the HOA's use of unlicensed enforcement. I need your report attached to their case number." He nodded, flipping through his tablet. "Yeah, we got that file. Claudine Rowe called in personally, tried to classify it as a domestic disturbance. We changed it back to battery with conducted energy weapon." I almost smiled. "Good. Keep it that way." "Between you and me," he said, lowering his voice, "half the department's tired of her complaints, always demanding citations, threatening to sue if we don't find her neighbors. She's made enemies in uniform, too." That was what I needed to hear. The system wasn't blind anymore. She'd overplayed her hand. I left the station with copies of the revised police report, heading straight to the county records office. Every HOA charter and contract filed under county law had to include a public accountability clause. I found Briarwood Lake Estates listed under nonprofit filings, then saw it. Registered security partnership pending review. Authorization incomplete. Incomplete. That one word meant the entire enforcement structure she'd built wasn't legally active. I printed the page, stapled it to the police report, and slid both into my expanding folder. Claudine had called herself untouchable. Now I had proof she didn't even exist on paper, the way she claimed. As I walked out of the records building, a familiar SUV pulled into the lot, Claudine's black Mercedes. She stepped out in heels sharp enough to draw blood, clipboard tucked under her arm, sunglasses even though the sky was gray. "You're everywhere you shouldn't be, Mr. Mallory," she said coolly. "Public Records Office," I replied. "I think that's allowed." Her mouth curved into a thin smile. "You're interfering in official HOA business. There are consequences for defamation." "You mean consequences for truth?" I said. "Because the state doesn't prosecute that." Her tone hardened. "You think a complaint changes anything? The DPOR moves at the speed of molasses. By the time they even read your file, you'll be bankrupt from fines, and I'll make sure of it." She brushed past me toward the entrance, but not before whispering, "You're not the first to try this, Ethan. You'll end up like the rest, quiet. I watched her disappear into the building, the echo of her heels fading like a clock counting down. She was desperate, cornered, and that made her dangerous. Back in my car, I called Carla again. They're going to retaliate with financial pressure, I said. Expected, she replied. Let them. Every illegal fine you receive after the complaint becomes evidence of retaliation. Document everything. And Ethan, don't react emotionally. Bureaucracy is a slow knife. Let it cut. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers, police statements, and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the lake shimmered under a thin veil of fog. Somewhere across it, Claudine's house lights burned like twin eyes. Marla was safe for now. The investigation was real, and for the first time, I wasn't just defending my family. I was building a case that could dismantle her entire illusion of power. The next phase wasn't about resistance. It was about precision. The complaint was in motion. Now I had to make sure it struck deep enough to end her reign for good. I hadn't heard from Gavin in days. After Claudine's warning outside the records office, he'd vanished. No patrol truck, no uniform at the gatehouse, not even a trace on the HOA's shift logs. People disappear quietly in neighborhoods like Briarwood. Sometimes they just stop showing up, and no one asks why. It was nearly midnight when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, a text. Doc, come alone. No signature, but I didn't need one. When I reached the lakeside, the air was heavy with mist. The water reflected the streetlights in broken lines, like nerves under skin. Gavin was there, half in shadow, wearing plain clothes this time. Jeans, a jacket too big for him. His hands were jammed deep into his pockets, but his shoulders were trembling. You're a hard man to reach, I said. He looked around nervously before speaking. You shouldn't be here. If she finds out, she already knows I'm breathing, I said. What else can she take? He exhaled hard. You don't get it, Ethan. She's not just filing fines anymore. She's cleaning house. I stepped closer. Meaning what? He swallowed. Rose Security's being dissolved. Her brother's transferring everything to a new company name. Briarwood Compliance Division. Same people, same trucks, new paperwork. That way, when the state comes asking about Roe, she can say the contract's been terminated. I felt the chill run through me. It was clever, deceptive enough to stall regulators. And she's doing this now? She started yesterday, he said. She told me to shred the patrol logs and switch the vehicle decals before Monday. Said it was standard restructuring. But it's not. She's burying the evidence before they knock on her door. Gavin's voice cracked on the last word. He looked exhausted, eyes ringed, fingers twitching at the edge of his jacket. You said you could protect me? That's still true? It is, I said. But I need more than fear. I need proof. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Every patrol report, every incident log, every internal message from her email alias. I copied them before she deleted them off the system. You realize what you've done? I asked. He nodded shakily. Yeah, I'm probably done. But someone had to stop her. She told us we were community safety enforcers. Said if anyone questioned us, we could say we worked under county oversight. I believed her until the night of your sister. He looked at the ground, jaw tight. That scream, it hasn't left my head. She didn't do anything wrong, Ethan. I saw her crying, begging me to stop. But Claudine said she was defying lawful authority. I panicked. I pulled the trigger. And when I realized what I'd done, Claudine just said, "Good, let that be a warning to the rest." The confession hit like a physical blow. I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch. The sound of the water lapping against the dock filled the space between us. Gavin's hands shook as he pressed the flash drive into my palm. There's one folder you'll want most. Contract templates. Look at the signatures. She used a forged notary seal to approve half those documents. That was bigger than I'd imagined. Forgery meant criminal charges, not just administrative sanctions. DPOR wouldn't just investigate, they'd revoke licenses, shut everything down, and possibly refer it to the state attorney. Gavin, I said quietly, this is enough to end her. He gave a hollow laugh. Yeah, well, it might end me too. I'll protect you, I said. The state needs witnesses. If you testify, they'll grant immunity. He shook his head. I don't trust immunity. I trust evidence. Just make sure it counts. Before I could answer, headlights swept across the lake road. Gavin froze like a cornered animal. A patrol SUV rolled past, slowing slightly before continuing on. When it disappeared, he stepped back toward the shadows. "She's watching everything," he whispered. "You've got maybe a day before she realizes I'm gone. After that, she'll start shredding whatever's left." "Then we move fast," I said. "You've done your part. Let me handle the rest." He nodded once, barely meeting my eyes. For what it's worth, I didn't join this job to hurt people, but she made us believe we had power. It's easy to lose yourself when someone hands you a badge, even a fake one. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket. "Then tonight, you got yourself back." When I turned toward the car, I heard the faint scrape of his boots fading into the fog behind me. The lake went still again. Quiet, reflective, merciless. By morning, that flash drive would be in the hands of the state. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't just reacting. I had the weapon that could finally cut through her lies. By dawn, the flash drive was burning a hole in my pocket. I hadn't slept. The whole night replayed in fragments, Gavin's voice breaking, the tremor in his hands, the sound of water hitting the dock after he vanished into the fog. He'd risked everything, and now the weight of that evidence sat with me. I drove straight to my firm's office in downtown Richmond. The city was barely awake, the streets smelled like rain and exhaust. I parked beside the loading bay, used my key card, and slipped inside. The motion lights flickered on one by one, illuminating the glass-walled conference rooms where we'd argued hundreds of cases. This time, I wasn't here to help someone else. This was war on paper, and I was done being defensive. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and opened the first folder. Row security incident logs, spanning 18 months. Every patrol report stamped with both Claudine's and her brother's digital signatures. The timestamps showed false entries. Entire patrols logged hours after they supposedly occurred. Then came the internal memos. Claudine instructing her staff to maintain visible enforcement presence and intervene directly with non-compliant residents. But the final folder, the one Gavin had mentioned, stopped me cold. Contract templates. Each document bore a forged notary stamp authorizing the HOA's enforcement rights. It wasn't just misconduct, it was criminal forgery under state law. If I tied that to her signature, DPOR wouldn't be the only one knocking. Law enforcement would too. I compressed everything into a single evidence packet, encrypted it, and uploaded it to the state's secure submission portal. Then I forwarded copies to Carlin Guyen, labeling the message, "New evidence, forgery and false contracting, Briarwood HOA." Within minutes, she called. "Ethan, this is a bomb," she said. "You realize what you're holding? Forged notarizations mean she can't claim ignorance anymore. The board is complicit by silence, but Claudine's the architect. We can trigger an emergency injunction request." "Do it," I said, "but move fast. Gavin says she's rebranding under a new company. Then we'll make sure she doesn't get the chance. I'll prep the filing. You gather public support, statements, resident affidavits, anything to show systemic abuse." Her words lit something in me. This wasn't just about exposing her. It was about restoring everyone she'd silenced. By mid-morning, I was back in Briarwood. The neighborhood looked the same: trimmed hedges, still water, quiet driveways. But beneath the manicured calm, I could feel tension spreading. News travels faster than HOA memos. A few neighbors were clustered by the mailboxes, whispering. When I approached, they fell silent. Then, Mrs. Tran stepped forward, clutching her cardigan. "Is it true?" she asked. "They say the state's investigating, that she's losing her position." "It's true," I said. "And if you've been fined, threatened, or silenced, now's the time to speak up. The regulators need to hear from residents." Mark Dalton appeared from behind his truck. "I'll give you my records," he said. Photos of her so-called violations. Maybe it's time someone pushed back. One by one, people began nodding. Fear was shifting into frustration, frustration into courage. Claudine's power had always depended on isolation. Now they were realizing they weren't alone. I collected testimonies on my tablet, dates, incidents, fines. Every detail would strengthen the case. By afternoon, I had enough to fill a binder. The people she'd silenced were finding their voices again. But as I was leaving, a familiar patrol SUV pulled up beside me. Only this time, the logo on the door had changed. Briarwood Compliance Division. Same truck, new name. Claudine stepped out, sunglasses reflecting the street. "You've been busy," she said coolly. "Collecting the truth," I replied. "Careful, Ethan. You're trespassing into slander." "Then sue me," I said. "Just make sure your new company name is spelled right for the subpoena." Her lips tightened. "You're making a mistake. You think the state will protect you? You're a resident, not an investigator." "Maybe," I said. "But now they have something you don't. Evidence." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in her expression. She turned sharply, muttered something into her phone, and climbed back into the SUV. As she sped off, I could almost see the panic starting to replace her confidence. Back home, I sat at my desk, printed copies of every affidavit, and attached them to the DPOR complaint file. I labeled the binder Resident Impact Evidence, Briarwood HOA. When I sealed it, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like closure taking shape. The victory strategy had shifted from defense to offense. The complaint was alive. The residents were awake. And Claudine Rowe was running out of places to hide. The next morning, I met Carla at the State Administration Building in Richmond. It was an austere block of concrete and glass, the kind of place where power speaks in paperwork. She was waiting by the revolving doors, a binder under one arm and a phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, she ended the call mid-sentence. "They've fast-tracked it," she said. "DPOR's compliance team will perform a site inspection this week. You did it, Ethan. The evidence was too strong to ignore." It didn't feel like victory yet. "What about retaliation?" I asked. "She's already rebranded once." Carla handed me a folder. "We filed for an emergency injunction against the Briarwood Compliance Division this morning. It freezes all operations until the state determines whether it's a fraudulent reincorporation. If Claudine uses those trucks again, she's in contempt." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. "Then we just need to make sure she tries." Carla's grin was sharp. "That's where you come in." We spread everything across a conference table. Contracts, violation letters, forged notary pages, sworn affidavits from residents. Each piece was a thread, and together they painted a picture of an empire built on coercion. Carla tapped one line in particular. "Directive authority delegated to private enforcement under executive discretion." "This is your smoking gun," she said. "No board approval, no legal standing. When the regulators see this, they'll shut her down mid-sentence." I nodded, though my thoughts were already ahead. To Marla, still resting at home. To Gavin, hiding somewhere between fear and redemption. Every person Claudine had crushed deserved to see her stripped of power in daylight. By noon, we had a plan. Carla would handle the legal coordination with DPOR, while I would deliver the updated evidence packet to the local county inspector's office, the branch authorized to escort state investigators into gated communities. That visit would trigger the inspection clock officially. The inspector, a broad-shouldered man named Roger Klein, met me in his cubicle, which looked more like a command post. "So you're the one stirring up Briarwood," he said, flipping through my binder. "Heard a lot of noise from that development lately." "Noise," I said, "is what happens when people stop being afraid." He grunted approval. "You've got solid documentation. If DPOR greenlights this inspection, I'll accompany them personally. But I'll need authorization from the county attorney first." "Do it," I said. "And be careful. She'll know it's coming." He chuckled. "They always do. Doesn't stop us from knocking." Leaving the office, I felt the air shift, like the calm before thunder. The paperwork was done. The fuse was lit. All that was left was to watch her empire burn itself down. Back in Briarwood that evening, I noticed subtle signs of panic spreading. The HOA notice board had been cleared again, leaving only a blank white frame. Patrol trucks were parked at odd angles, decals half peeled. Claudine's Mercedes wasn't in its usual driveway. But what caught my attention was the movement near the clubhouse, 3 men hauling boxes to a dumpster behind the building. I parked quietly and walked closer. From the corner of the lot, I saw shredded papers blowing across the pavement. Claudine's assistant was feeding entire file boxes into a portable shredder. The sound was unmistakable, plastic chewing truth into dust. "Destroying evidence," I whispered. Then I pulled out my phone and hit record. The camera caught everything, the boxes, the names on the labels, violation records, row security logs, board memos. I even zoomed in on Claudine herself, standing nearby, directing the process with her phone to her ear. Her calm, deliberate movements told me she thought she was still ahead. But this was exactly what we needed. Under Virginia law, destruction of documents during an active state investigation was obstruction, grounds for immediate intervention. I uploaded the footage to Carla, texting. Caught her shredding board files. Time-stamped, GPS logged. Her reply came seconds later. Perfect. Hold position. State investigator en route with warrant request. The sun dropped low over the lake, casting everything in amber light. I stayed hidden near the tree line, filming until the last box was reduced to confetti. Then, as Claudine turned toward her SUV, she froze, her eyes scanning the edge of the parking lot. For a second, I thought she'd seen me. Then she looked past, straight into the reflection of flashing red lights appearing down the main road. Sheriff's cruisers, 2 of them. She backed up fast, shouting orders to her assistants, but it was too late. The investigators were already here. As the first car rolled past me toward the gate, I exhaled for the first time all day. The waiting was over. The next time Claudine Rowe saw me, it wouldn't be on her property. It would be across a courtroom floor. When the state cars rolled through the Briarwood gates, it felt like the air itself shifted. Residents came out of their houses, whispering from driveways and porches as uniformed investigators and sheriff's deputies stepped into their perfect little world of trimmed hedges and unspoken fear. Claudine's harmony through compliance was cracking right down the middle, and I stood just far enough away to watch it fall. The lead investigator, Ruth Danner, moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd seen 100 scams dressed as systems. She carried a slim black case and wore the DPOR badge like a blade. "We'll need access to the community office and any secured storage," she told Deputy Alvarez, who was already radioing his team to block the back exits. Claudine emerged from the clubhouse with her clipboard, sunglasses hiding everything but panic. "This is private property," she snapped. "You have no jurisdiction here." Ruth's voice was calm. "We do now. Pursuant to complaint number 25-1173, this site is under state inspection. Step aside, Ms. Rowe." That number, the one from my confirmation email, rang like a bell in my head. Claudine's color drained. Still, she tried to recover, forcing a smile. "This is all a misunderstanding. Our security division operates independently." Ruth opened her case, pulling out copies of the contracts Gavin had risked everything to deliver. "Independently?" she asked. "You mean the contracts signed with your own name, under a forged notary seal?" Silence. Even the deputies stopped moving. Claudine's mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stayed near the fence line, camera running. Every second mattered. Every reaction, every excuse. Across the courtyard, Mark Dalton and Mrs. Tran were watching too. I saw them exchange looks, half fear, half relief. The neighborhood that had once cowered behind curtains was finally seeing justice with its own eyes. When Ruth motioned for the evidence boxes, Alvarez's men pried open the office door. Inside, the air smelled like burnt paper and toner. A half-destroyed shredder sat smoking in the corner. "She was already disposing of documents," Alvarez said. Ruth turned to Claudine. "You're aware destruction of records during a state inquiry constitutes obstruction?" Claudine's voice cracked. "You can't just—" "Ma'am," Ruth cut in, "I strongly advise you not to finish that sentence." She didn't. Her hands trembled, the clipboard shaking just enough for her signature to blur in the sunlight. I kept my distance, heart pounding, filming every word. This was the execution phase of the strategy, the moment when outside authority did what the community couldn't. I'd prepared the evidence. Now, the state was wielding it. Minutes later, Ruth stepped outside again. "Mr. Mallory," she called. I approached slowly, conscious of every eye on me. "I'm told you initiated this complaint," she said. "You'll need to provide direct testimony verifying these documents." "Of course," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Everything I submitted matches the originals." She merged a private company with the HOA and used forged authorization to enforce fines and physical compliance. Ruth nodded. "That aligns with what we've already found. This will move to formal administrative hearing, but we're seizing all relevant property records immediately." Claudine tried to speak again, her voice brittle. "You can't seize HOA property without board approval. The board no longer has standing," Ruth replied. "Not after signing fraudulent contracts." the words landed like a verdict. Behind us, a few residents began clapping, hesitant at first, then louder. Claudine's jaw locked. Her carefully curated image of authority was collapsing in public view. She turned to me, face pale and sharp. "You think this ends me?" she hissed. "You'll still live here. You'll still pay dues. You'll still answer to someone." "Maybe," I said, "but not to you." Her hand twitched toward her phone, but the deputies were already escorting her toward the car. As she passed, the clipboard slipped from her grip and hit the pavement with a dull slap. A single page fluttered loose, her last violation notice against me. It blew across the lot, stopping near my shoe. I bent down, picked it up, and folded it neatly. "Evidence," I murmured, tucking it into my jacket. The sun broke through the clouds as Ruth signaled her team to wrap up. Trucks idled, boxes loaded, seals stamped. The official red tape went around the clubhouse doors, marking them as state property. For the first time since this began, Briarwood was quiet. Not the brittle quiet of fear, but the clean silence that comes after a storm. I watched as Claudine's Mercedes was towed from the lot, her nameplate still glinting on the dashboard. Around me, neighbors stood together in small groups, talking freely. This wasn't victory yet, but it was the turning point. The state was in control now, and Claudine Rowe's empire was no longer her own. 3 weeks later, the county courthouse was overflowing. The administrative hearing had been moved from the small meeting room to the main chamber because too many residents showed up. Every row was packed. Homeowners, reporters, lawyers, even a few of the sheriff's deputies who'd helped seize Claudine's records. For the first time in Briarwood's history, the people she'd silenced were here to watch her answer for it. I stood near the front, binder in hand, beside Ruth Danner and Carla Nguyen. Across the aisle sat Claudine Rowe, her confidence reduced to something brittle and exhausted. She wore the same navy suit she'd flaunted at every HOA meeting, but now it looked too tight, her posture too forced. Her attorney whispered in her ear, but her eyes never left me. The presiding officer, a calm man with silver hair, called the hearing to order. This proceeding concerns complaint number 251173, alleging unauthorized enforcement activity and forgery by the Briarwood Lake Estates Homeowners Association and its acting president, Ms. Claudine Rowe. My mother, State Senator Ellen Mallory, sat in the front row behind Ruth Danner, her expression carved from stone. She'd left committee hearings in Richmond to be here today, and the room knew it. For once, power was watching power. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Claudine's lawyer rose immediately. "We move to dismiss," he said. "The state lacks jurisdiction over private association governance." Ruth spoke before the officer could respond. "Jurisdiction is established under Virginia Code Section 91138. This isn't a governance dispute, it's unlicensed enforcement. A pregnant resident was assaulted under directives issued by this board." A hush fell over the room. The officer nodded. "Motion denied. Proceed." Carla tapped my arm, signaling it was time. I stood, walked to the podium, and faced the crowd. My voice came out steady, but my heart pounded in my throat. "My name is Ethan Mallory. I'm a civil rights paralegal and resident of Briarwood Lake Estates. I filed this complaint after my sister, Marla Mallory, was tased by an unlicensed contractor acting under orders from Ms. Rowe. What began as a personal incident revealed something far larger, a system built on fear, forged documents, and illegal authority. I opened the binder, turning to the first exhibit. This is the contract between Briarwood HOA and Rowe Security. The notary seal was digitally forged. The same seal appears on 21 subsequent enforcement notices. Ruth wheeled the evidence cart forward. The documents were displayed on a large monitor. Claudine's attorney objected, but the officer waved him down. Ms. Rowe, I continued, used her position to merge a private company with the HOA, allowing her to issue fines and threaten residents with physical enforcement. She called it community safety. The law calls it impersonating authority. The audience erupted in whispers. A man from the back stood up, Mark Dalton. "She fined me $800 for parking my truck near the curb," he said. "Said it obstructed uniformity. I paid because I was scared of losing my house." Another voice rose. Mrs. Tran clutched a photo of her late husband's garden. "She destroyed the memorial we built. Said it wasn't aesthetic." The presiding officer banged his gavel lightly. "Order, please." but he didn't hide the hint of sympathy in his tone. Ruth gestured to the next slide, photos from the inspection, the shredded records, the burned paper, the false company decals. These, she said, are the remains of evidence Ms. Rowe attempted to destroy after the investigation was announced. Destruction occurred within 48 hours of receiving the complaint notice. Claudine finally snapped. "You don't understand," she shouted, standing abruptly. "This community was chaos before I took control. Property values were falling. People ignored rules. Someone had to bring order." Her voice echoed across the chamber. I waited until the silence settled again. "Order built on fear isn't order," I said. "It's dictatorship, and you didn't protect this community. You exploited it." A wave of murmurs spread, louder this time, more unified. Even her attorney seemed to shrink in his chair. Claudine's face flushed red, her voice cracking. "You think you're a hero, Ethan? You'll see how fast this place collapses without me." "I don't want it to collapse," I said quietly. "I want it to breathe." That broke something. People began applauding. First a few, then dozens. The sound filled the room, sharp and raw, years of anger turning into release. Claudine's hands clenched at her sides as deputies stepped closer. The presiding officer's voice rose above the noise. "The evidence of forgery, misuse of funds, and unlicensed enforcement is compelling. This hearing finds probable cause for full revocation of Briarwood Lake Estates HOA's charter pending court review. Ms. Rowe, you are hereby removed from office effective immediately." The applause turned into an uproar. Claudine's clipboard fell to the floor again, papers scattering like feathers. She stared at them blankly, as if realizing too late that the power she'd built on signatures and threats had dissolved in front of a crowd she once ruled. Ruth nodded to me once, satisfied. Carla whispered, "It's over." I looked around the packed chamber, neighbors hugging, some crying, all free. "No," I said under my breath. "It's beginning." The morning after the hearing, Briarwood Lake Estates didn't look the same. The metal sign that once read "Harmony Through Compliance" had been taken down during the night. In its place was a blank post, catching the sunrise like an open page waiting to be written again. For the first time in years, the neighborhood sounded alive. Children laughing, sprinklers running, dogs barking without someone threatening to find them. I walked down the cul-de-sac with a stack of letters under my arm. Official notifications from the state confirming the HOA's charter suspension. Claudine's office was locked, the seal from the Department of Professional Regulation still plastered across the door. It was over, and yet, standing there, I didn't feel triumph. I felt release, like the air had finally cleared after years of stale silence. Mark Dalton caught up to me halfway down the street. "She really gone?" he asked. "Gone and barred from holding any HOA position in the state of Virginia," I said. "The DPOR revoked her contracting license, too. Her brother's company's under criminal review." He exhaled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day." "You will," I said, handing him one of the letters. "That's the notice for the interim community board. You and Mrs. Tran were nominated." Mark blinked. "Me, after all the fines?" "Especially after the fines," I said. "This time, we build something accountable." As I moved door to door, handing out the same notices, I saw what power used to hide, a community rediscovering itself. People were talking again, trading garden tools, waving from porches. No one was whispering anymore. By noon, I found myself back at the lakeside dock where it had all begun. The water was still, reflecting the clean blue sky. Gavin was there, sitting at the edge in plain clothes, fishing pole in hand. He looked younger somehow, like the guilt had finally loosened its grip. "They said you testified," I said, sitting beside him. He nodded slowly. "Ruth told me I'll be cleared under immunity. I still can't sleep some nights, but at least it means something now." "It means everything," I said. He reeled in the line, the lure glinting in the sun. "You think this place can actually change?" "It already has," I said. "The law doesn't erase fear, but it gives people permission to stop living under it." Gavin smiled faintly. "You ever going to move?" I looked across the lake toward my father's old house, the porch now repaired, the spot where the birdhouse used to hang. "No," I said. "This is home, and home isn't something you abandon just because someone tried to own it." We sat there for a while, the silence easy now, not heavy. Across the water, a few kids were helping Mrs. Tran replant her late husband's roses near the fence. It was small, simple, human, the kind of peace Claudine never understood how to control. That evening, the community gathered at the park, the same place where the board once held mandatory meetings. Now, there was no microphone, no agenda, just neighbors bringing food, folding chairs, and stories. Marla came too, moving slower but smiling. When people saw her, they applauded quietly, some wiping tears. She just shook her head and laughed. "Don't clap," she said. "Just promise you'll keep this place kind." When the crowd settled, I stood near the gazebo, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "We spent years thinking rules would save us," I said, "but what saves a community isn't control, it's conscience." Claudine's power fell apart because she forgot the difference. Mrs. Tran lifted her hand. "So what happens now?" "Now," I said, "we build again. We elect people who listen. We write bylaws that protect, not punish. And if anyone forgets why that matters, we remind them of this moment." I turned toward the tree line, where the new board planned to hang the birdhouse. The same one my father built. The one Claudine once ordered destroyed. It had been restored, repainted by the kids. On the front, someone had written in black marker, "Freedom belongs here." As the crowd applauded, I looked around one last time, the sunset glowing across faces that finally looked unafraid. Ruth and Carla stood near the gate, smiling. Even the deputies lingered, hands in their pockets, relaxed. I realized then it was never just about the HOA or a forged contract. It was about something deeper, proving that intimidation only works until someone stands up and says, "No more." If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.